Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Harne podcast. Today's episode is going to be focused on product management. And to talk about it, we have with us Ritika Shukla. Before pursuing her MBA from the Schulich School of Business in Toronto, Ritika was an educational specialist in India. How was she able to transform her career? What has she learned during her journey? And how can we benefit from her experiences? We are going to discuss all these things on this episode. Before we begin, I will request you to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and leave us your feedback in the comment section down below. Now, let's get this conversation started. Hi, Ritika. Thank you so much for giving us your time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Always a pleasure. And Ritika, let's dive right into it.
Mhm.
Please tell us a little bit about your background and what you used to do before your MBA.
So before my MBA, I was working in education sector. Social sector in general, but specifically education sector. I completed Teach for India fellowship. I was doing my fellowship for 2 years. And then after that, I stayed in education sector, loved it, worked with another company called Education Initiative for almost 2 years. Worked with governments, NGOs, with government agencies like UN. And I really loved that work. But almost after working like 4 years in that sector, I felt there was more for me to explore and like more for me to learn. So hence the MBA. But yeah, like that was my life before MBA.
Right. And let's dig a little more into that. So you said there was more for you to learn and more for you to explore, and hence you did your MBA.
Mhm.
So what was it about MBA that attracted you? I mean, why not do some other degree? And why do MBA specifically from Schulich School of Business in Canada?
Definitely. So I would be very honest, like I was thinking about different masters as well. So one of the things that was in my mind was regarding masters of public administration, because definitely, like as I said, like I was in social sector and that was my background. So I was thinking of all the options that I can take up to grow my career. So Master of Public Administration was also on the cards, and I did apply for a couple of schools there. So my focus was more on getting an MPA, MBA sort of like a course which can combine both of those things. And I got through NYU, specifically through NYU Wagner. But then Schulich also came into picture, and Schulich had a program on social enterprises. They had like a whole school which is dedicated to that. So that's why I applied for Schulich as well, because the idea was I wanted to stay at that point of time, I wanted to stay in social sector, and my mind was very much set into what I wanted to do. So that's why I applied to Schulich as well. But in Schulich, I got a scholarship. So I was like, okay, definitely I want to stay in this sector, but I also want to save some money because I know social sector doesn't have that much money. So I finally decided that Schulich would be a good place for me, because it will not only give me an insight into like the social sector, but also like a whole new world that I hadn't thought about. And now looking back, I think so it was a good decision to not focus on just like a very specific degree, but then have an open degree like MBA, because if exploration was my goal, I felt like MBA did that for me.
And I completely agree with you. MBA does give you a lot of opportunities. You can switch your career paths as you have done successfully. So we'll talk about that in a while. But tell me about your MBA interview experience at Schulich. Like specifically, what do you think was so different about your profile? What worked in your interview, which got you your admission?
Okay. So that's like long time ago. I, I do not remember the specifics of it, but I clearly remember one thing, that when I was preparing for my interviews, um, I was very scared. I was like, oh my God, I'm competing with all these people who have worked in Deloitte and BCG. And like, I've just worked in like these smaller companies, and that too social sector. Like, I don't know how will I stand against those people, like in terms of my profile. But I think so that was the thing that made me stand out during the whole interview process, because it wasn't like my profile wasn't like anybody else's. I worked as a teacher for 2 years with Teach for India Fellowship, and like after doing engineering, if somebody just like leaves everything and go into teaching, it's just a very good conversation starter. So that, and I felt like just the work that I was doing with government and like with the low income students, so it just made my profile little different from other people. I think so that perhaps made it stand out, but that's my best guess. But I would say that definitely the sort of trajectory that I had before MBA, that I think so made my profile stand out. And the interview process was pretty good. I think so. It was Schulich really acknowledged that I had my experience was different. It was unique. The questions were very much tailored to understanding how what was my work and like how I'm going to utilize this degree to get to like another level of my career. And I felt like it was very inviting, and the questions sort of that they asked were like more exploratory. So yeah, that's probably what I remember.
Yeah, and I think you make a very important point over there that what you thought would be your weakness actually turned out to be your strength.
Exactly.
So we have to highlight what is unique in our profile. That is what makes us stand out, and I think ultimately works in our favor during the interview process. So
For sure. Yeah.
yeah. So you have any other tips for the listeners who might be preparing for business school interviews?
I would say exactly like as you said, like looking at your profile, doing a deep dive into what makes it unique is always like a good thing to do. We might think like, oh, this is just like a small thing that I did, but no, sometimes like that, those small things can be just highlight of your like whole package of your like whatever you are preparing. And I always feel like it's more of like pitch, right? Like you're pitching yourself to it's not a product, it's not anything, like it's you're pitching yourself to the school saying that, hey, I'm great, but I can make whatever I have bring to the school and like do greater things. So it's also about like looking at the school, what type of school it is, what are different programs on the school, like not just MBA, but then what are other schools which are in the whole university, and just like projecting that idea of like what I can do when I come to the school, like, and giving that like you have a vision about it. I think so that really helps. I did my research about York universities and like and thought about like what are different schools, not just like the MBA school, but then like what other schools are doing, what all professors are there, like what are their research going on. So I sort of dived into that just to understand like how I can pitch that, hey, I have worked in education, I know you have an education school, and like maybe we can like I want to do this and that. You do that, that's a different thing because opportunities come and you move to different directions. But when you are pitching yourself, like doing that thorough research about the school and what is going on in the school, and trying to pitch yourself in that picture to show the hirer the like, oh, this is where I can be useful, is always helpful. Yeah.
Those are wonderful tips, and I particularly agree with the point which you make that what can you contribute. So that
Mhm.
shows to the interviewer that you have done your homework and you know that what is going on at the university.
Definitely.
So thank you so much for that answer. Now, Ritika, let's talk about your journey. You said that you were more focused into the social sector, but now you are working as a product manager.
Yeah.
So what changed? How did you decide on being a product manager?
So, like just to be precise, like especially so when I was working with my past company in education initiative, I used to work with a lot of government projects, and a part of my role was like project management, but also part of my role involved talking to clients and doing consulting for them, trying to understand their problems, and then sort of telling them like this is what we can do for you, right? So I really enjoyed that part. Like that was always something that I really like working with users, like trying to understand what are their problems, and then sort of driving those solutions. So at that point of time, I didn't have that vocabulary. Like I didn't know what I was doing. All I knew was like, oh, I think so consultant like do this. And that's all I knew. Like I was like, okay. So then my idea was I want to be a consultant, but in social enterprises, because that's where my expertise are. So maybe like a BCG, and they have like their social consulting. So I can see myself there in a very niche role. So that was my idea coming into the MBA. But when we started taking the classes, and I felt like the first year specifically really opened up my mind in terms of giving me vocabulary about like what all lies beyond, right? Like sometimes we think that, in India, like specifically, I feel like we are very much focused towards certain sort of roles because that's what we know. And I come from a very small town in Rajasthan, so I felt like I never had that vocabulary. So once I got into Schulich first year and I saw like, oh, okay, you can do this as well. You can do this as well. Oh, this is also a thing. I think so that really pushed me. And while doing that whole exercise, I again like looked at my strength and my weaknesses. And I think so self-reflection always helps because you are just looking at your strength. And what I did was looking at my strength and obviously talking to amazing professors that Schulich has, who are always ready to help, amazing alumni, and talking to all the people, I sort of start reflecting on my strengths. And now I have this vocabulary of like what are like different avenues for me to utilize those strengths. And one of those things was like marketing came into picture, and I was like, oh my god, like maybe I can be a marketer. And I tried that. I did my internship in marketing, like specifically SEO, and I never worked in SEO. I had no clue about what it was, but I did it and I loved it. But then came the idea of product marketing also somewhere came into the picture, because again, I was looking at my strengths and I was trying to figure out where I was fitting into the picture. And remember, like this was 2020, right? This was COVID period. So all we could do was like just analyze ourselves and like the opportunities, like because it was very limited. So you have to figure out how to do that. So one of the alumni actually suggested me that, Ritika, have you looked into product management ever? Like looking at your resume and looking at your strengths and like your profile, I feel like product management can be suitable for you. And I was like, what is that? Like I've never thought about it. And then I'm so thankful to him that he really gave me tools, really connected to with me to different people whom I can talk to about product management. Our batchmate, like a couple of them are product managers, like they were aiming to be a product manager. So just talking to them, trying to understand very nicely, like those people really helped me in reviewing my resume, tweaking it to product management requirement and how I can pitch myself again as a product manager. And that really helped. And ultimately, I found myself a role which was very fitting to what I wanted. And I'm so thankful that somebody gave me a chance. And it's been 1.5 years now. I've been doing product management, and I think so. It was a good choice. I really enjoy my work.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of wisdom in that answer because you took the time to explore the opportunities and not just explore, but explore it based on your strengths and weaknesses. So that's answer you said of self-reflection and knowing yourself that this will be a good fit versus this will not be such a good fit. And then doing internships where you had done things which you've never done before. So MBA does give you those opportunities. So it's very important to take those and see what you like and what you don't like, because a lot of people switch careers post MBA and a lot of people have no clue what they are going to do post their MBA. Can you please tell us what does your resume and what the networking look like?
So while getting into the product management, how did it look like?
Specifically, yes. I mean, when you started aiming for the role of a product manager, you must have prepared your resume and you must have done some networking to get into the role. So, what did that look like? Like, were there any specific keywords you had to include on your resume? How did the interview process look like? If you could expand on that, please.
For sure. So, getting into product management was, I think, so way difficult than I initially thought about. Like when somebody suggested, oh, you should be product management. And I want to say like, it wasn't like a quick that, oh, I want to be in product management and I was in product management. Like that didn't happen overnight. I gave a lot of interviews. I got rejected because the very reason I was getting rejected was because my resume didn't say product manager in the title anywhere. The role didn't say like product management, the designation wasn't that. And the one thing about product management is that if you want to get into it, either you need to have like some sort of product experience as a product manager, or you need to have some sort of like background in tech. That's what my thought process was at that point. An MBA, or you like, that was the things that people were looking at. And I yes, I had my MBA, but my resume was more catered toward a social sector, or a consultant, probably I would say. Like, my resume wasn't that front. So my first step was just trying to understand what the role was, like looking at like all the responsibilities and everything. And then I went ahead and just tweaked my resume to highlight and like make it sound more like a resume of a person who has worked in product, or has an idea of technology, has an idea of like having more customer focusedness, which I already had. Like, all these things were there, but I never put it that way, right? Like, I just didn't do it because that wasn't my audience. So now my audience had completely changed. So just I went through that and like changed each and everything on my resume to cater to more new audience that I had, to get that vocabulary in of like, oh, use cases, or being customer focused, or getting in any work that I did with like developers, or like having an idea of design. So that really helped. Also, I felt like I did this fellowship again. Like, I did a lot of fellowships, to be honest. I did again a fellowship with Propel Impact, and they were like an HSBC fellowship for 6 or 7 months, where we used to work with like these social organizations, and used to help them in terms of marketing, or in terms of like design consulting. Like, so I did that project to show that, hey, I have an acumen for design as well. So now I was pitching myself that I have access of business, like this acumen for business. I have worked in like a little bit of design, and tech is something that, because I was working in an ed tech company, and then in Teach for India also, I got to work on this one project with Apple. So I figured out what are the tech projects that I did. So I just highlighted those on my resume. So ultimately, my resume was like an intersection of like design, business, and technology. And I was like, hey, I can do all. And I'm right at the center of it, which is basically that is what product management is. And I think so it took some time and like a lot of work for me to get my resume in place. But once that was in place, once my story was in place, I could just pitch myself and started talk to people about it, and like talk to more product management, did some courses on LinkedIn to get my vocabulary in, like that correct vocabulary, and ultimately started interviewing for those things. And like after 1 or 2 interview, I finally got into the job. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that answer. And now let's talk about how did you get this interview call? So did you reach out on to people on LinkedIn? Was it a cold application? Did someone refer you? How did that work out?
Oh, this was like I think so. It touched wood. Like, it was an opportunity that I just found on LinkedIn. Like, I was like everybody during that time. I was spending a lot of time on LinkedIn. Like, it was like it was almost like my fourth subject in MBA. Like, I was there on LinkedIn, just trying to find any role that I can. And for me, the idea was more into getting into product management rather than looking at that perfect seniority role, or like giving me exactly the money that I want. I was more looking at like, how can I get into this field? And then I had faith in my skills. So I was like, okay, I can grow, but then like I need to get into this first. So I found this role of an associate product manager in my current company, which is TouchTunes. So it was a music company, and I had been as I said, like the whole journey was very exploratory for me. And one of the things that I explored in business school was entertainment. And I always wanted to be in that field as a child, because I was a singer in my past life. And I was like, oh, but I really wanted to be in this field, but I never explored it because those opportunities never came. And thank God for Schulich, like I got those opportunities. And I was like, okay, this is music and this is associate product management. This is like best of all the things that I like. So I went onto the LinkedIn. I reached out to the HR and messaged her that, hey, this is me and I'm super interested and like would love to talk to you. And she responded. And we got on a call, had the discussion, and she on the spot started taking my interview of like,
Uh-huh.
oh, what did you do? And thank God, because of the all those rejections that I had before, my script was ready, my what I had to say was ready, and everything was there, so I could convince her that, hey, I'm interested in it, and see, I have knowledge about it. And the second thing she asked me is like, okay, then this looks good, can you please send me a portfolio? And I was like, what, a portfolio? Like, I don't know what a portfolio is, I've never made portfolio in my life. But I was like, yes, I will send it to you. And she's like, okay, I need it, and like if you can send it me in a day or two. And I was like, yes, I will do it. And looking at back, like I think about it, and I was like, I just made a portfolio within like 24 hours. And I sat through it, Googled how to make a portfolio, and just dived right into it. Took all my projects, made like small presentations out of it, and like just like created like a web link and made a sort of presentation and made a timeline, and just sent her that.
Yeah, let me just pause you there for a second, and if you could elaborate on what is a portfolio, because a lot of listeners might not know what a
Oh,
portfolio actually is. And for like from an Indian context, when someone tells you, can you send me a portfolio, my answer would be, but I'm not a model, I've never done a portfolio shoot. So please explain what a portfolio is.
exactly, that was on my mind as well. I'm like, what are you asking me? So portfolio is basically, it can, it's basically like a collection of your work, right? In very like very simple terms, it's a collection of your past work. Usually when you are working with designers, they have all their work that they have done to showcase, and that's their portfolio. But even in product management, sometimes they ask your portfolio because you had worked on some products, right? Like, so how did that product look like? What impact did it have? And like you can present it, and that's what like a lot of product managers right now, at least in North America, I've seen that pattern, that one of the product managers have those portfolio to showcase that, hey, I've worked on mobile, hey, I've worked on web, I have worked on such sort of service. So when you are sending your resume, or you put a link of that, so it's not just now words. People really like to see things, and they see that you have put in that effort to curate your work, right, to tell a story. And sometimes better than those words, those stories really catches everybody's attention. So those are sort of like, that's portfolio, and that's like basically a collection of your work. So for me, I never did that back in India because nobody asked me for it. And I was like, I don't think so. We need portfolio. But when that ask came, I just did it. And we all have done our work. It's just we haven't curated it. But now my practice is that every time I'm doing something, a project gets completed, I try to create like a small presentation of it. And I try to add it to my portfolio so that I can show people now that what I can do, rather than just my resume, or so that like it's there, and I can just send the link and be like, hey, explore and ask me questions. So now I control the narrative of interviews, right? Rather than them asking any random question, it's more focused towards what I want them to ask because I've prepared for it, and I've set the stage that way. So yeah.
I think that's an excellent tip over there. Even I need to make my portfolio now because what happens is once in a while you want to switch jobs, and then you try to remember, oh, what did I do in that past project? I can't remember what I exactly did. So if you make a portfolio, then you have all that information handy and you can send that link and set the narrative as you rightly said. So that's a very important tip. Thank you so much for that. Now talking about your interview, Ritika, I mean, can you please tell us what are some typical questions asked? Like, is there a case study which you are asked to crack on the call? How does the interview process work like?
So interview process for product management, I think so it varies with the company. Because every company has a very different definition of what product manager is going to do. So not like if I'm working right now in whatever capacity I am as a product manager in my company, that won't be the same if I move to another company. So it's a, first of all, it is very driven by what our companies need, and what roles and responsibilities they are going to give you. So it's very much driven by that. So just keep that in mind while I like answer those questions, because it can be same, it can be different, like because it's such a role.
Sure.
But for me, my process, as I said, because there was a portfolio involved, as I was saying, like I controlled the narrative pretty much. So I didn't have a case interview, but I had to present one of my work, and they interviewed me through that, like what I did, and just grilled me over it in terms of like, how did you do it? What were the strengths, the weakness, and what was your discovery process of the thing? So one of the things that happen in product manager management interview is like they have this whole discovery question of like, okay, so this is a problem, how would you solve it, right? Those sort of questions they always ask, because they want to see that if you can understand the problem, if you can break it down and see like if you can connect it to like matrix and everything. So they do that. So that's like one very typical question. Another question that typically comes up is so which is your favorite product? Like you want to do a product manager role, like which product do you think is doing really well, why it is doing very well, how you can improve that product, or what are like the problems that you have seen. Or they can give you a sort of a product of like, oh, this is our product, this is our need, now how are you going to solve it? So these interviews are more related to solving question, understanding user needs, and like breaking it down. A lot of my work currently involves breaking down problems and putting it in terms of like a roadmap of like, what is a priority, what are we going to do first, where the business money is going to go, right? So that is sort of like what are the normal questions like people ask during an interview. And that's what I was asked like, what is my favorite app? And I was like, Spotify. And then they asked me to just like break whatever Spotify does, not does, and all that. So that was my process. Like, yeah.
And any tips on how can candidates prepare for them?
I would say like we all, whenever we are working with apps or like you're looking at apps, have a critical eye. Like I would say like that's one thing. One of the thing that I do usually is that I've been reading a lot of newsletters of different product managers, and and it really helps me in terms of looking at product and seeing like, oh, this is how it is done, how it can be better, like is it a good experience for me or not, like from the UX perspective, from the UI perspective, how is the data would have been they must be using, what is the technology behind it. So I'm more focused on like UX UI and data part of it, because that's where I feel like I shine more. Those are my strengths, and not technology perspective per se. But looking at all these things whenever you are interacting with any app or any website, or in general, like just the understanding where the problem is coming from, I think so that really helps.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And Ritika, you chose to work in Montreal and you studied in Toronto. So my last question to you is, how is life different in Montreal as compared to Toronto?
Oh, yes, I did that. I made the transition to Montreal. I never thought I would do that, but life in Montreal is fun. It's so good. I would say like it was one of, again, like very good decision that I took, because I'm way out of my comfort zone, I would say, because on day-to-day basis, I have to talk in a language which I do not necessarily completely understand. I'm alone here. All my friends are in Toronto. So that's also one of the layer to it, to the complexity. And plus I'm working with this new company in a new role. So a lot of newness, I would say, like it's balancing the how much newness is there, and like it sometimes gets overwhelming. But I think so if you want to really grow and in a different country, in a like people with different people, I would say like it was a great decision for me to move to Montreal, and Montreal is just super beautiful. So I like it here.
I've visited it once, so I agree with what you say. It is super beautiful. But have you faced any challenges with respect to the language over there? Because you, as a product manager, have to converse with a lot of users. And French is a language which not a lot of people are familiar with. And I'm sure you also must have not been as familiar. Probably you are more familiar now. But how does that work? Do you face any challenges with respect to that?
So thankfully, my company is my company's most of the user base is in like in US, so it's not a problem for me that way. But then yes, a major part of my role is doing user interviews, and for that I have to go out, and out means talking to users. And when you are in Montreal, there's a high chances that 60% of the time you'll bump into a person who speaks French, and that time it's like, oh, okay. But then I think so what worked with me was that I took it as a learning opportunity again. I used always go with one of my designers and a person who speaks French, so that if I'm not able to get the best out of that conversation, I have somebody who can do that for me. And that way I rely on people. I try to work in teams most of the time, which is really good for me because I like working with people, but 100% that way I can learn and observe. And so that's what I try to do. So in terms of French, I would say that it's not a big barrier. Like people in Montreal do speak English. It's not that you can't do your work, but then if you are looking for roles which are more like consulting based, or which are you have to talk on a daily basis with people, with regular people in French, that's where the roles are low, it get tricky. But if you are like an engineer, or like somebody who's going to work internally, English is completely fine. Like it's good to be bilingual for sure. It's a plus one, but it's not a huge problem. At least I haven't faced that issue.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ritika. This conversation has been extremely, extremely knowledgeable. I gained a lot of insights, which I did not know. For example, the portfolio thing, I heard it for the first time. Thank you so much for your time, and I wish you all the best for your future.
Thank you so much, Raghav. Thank you for inviting me. This was very useful for me as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave us your feedback in the comments section. Until the next time, this is me, Raghavendra Harne, signing off. Take care.